Sometimes it doesn't matter how much care we provide or how much we love. Even when the family is not our own. Because there are times when fate intervenes and worlds collide. And a night out can end in a nightmare. In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Homicide detectives are called to the underground parking garage of a high-rise in Toronto's East End. The badly beaten body of a young woman has been found in a public stairwell.
It was just a truly horrifying and shocking crime scene to look at.
It was very obvious to Detective Como and I that she had suffered some type of sexual attack.
Her pants and underwear were off, her socks were on, her legs were spread apart on this landing. And I thought to myself, this is just a horrible way for someone to meet their end.
I was trying to develop in my mind a scenario of what happened, trying to picture what type of person would actually commit this crime.
Victims are not normally left like this in homicide cases. This was certainly something very, very unusual, and you knew right away that you were dealing with the worst possible type of offender.
Como recognizes the telltale sign of a lust murderer.
A lust murderer will frequently display the victim's body in an attempt to shock members of the public, showing others how proud they are of what they've done to another human being.
The killer could have blonde hair. The forensic team makes another discovery as well.
There was a headset to a Walkman the deceased had on her head, but there was no Walkman at the scene.
They find no purse or anything else that might help identify the victim.
At the scene that morning, there was a man who is asking about his girlfriend. His girlfriend was supposed to come last night to visit him, and she never showed up.
The man lives in the high-rise. He's worried all the police activity has something to do with his girlfriend's disappearance. Her name is Benita DeSagan. He says she's the kind of person who always calls if she's going to be late. The detectives give him the news. Benita's boyfriend tells them where Benita lives, but he's too upset to answer any more questions. Como and McCullough need to know more about Benita. They follow up on the address her boyfriend has given them.
Benita DeSagan was a 37-year-old Filipino nanny who had come here to Toronto to work for a couple who had children.
When Benita's employer hears what has happened, she is overcome. She tells police Benita never gave the family any problems.
She was a good nanny, and her employers, were very pleased to have her here in the city working for them, and that she did a good job with their children, and they enjoyed having her there, living in their house as well.
Benita had been living here for well over a year. She had become part of the family. Upstairs, the detectives searched Benita's room.
One of the important things we found was an empty box that belonged to a Walkman.
The detectives are reminded of the headphones found at the crime scene.
Something I know that lust murderers will do is they will take trophies from their victims to be able to help them relive their fantasies around the murder and the sexual attack on their victims.
The autopsy confirms blunt force trauma to the head was the cause of death. It also confirms Benita DeSagan was raped. Semen is found on her body. Investigators asked that it be sent to the lab for DNA profiling. 72 hours into the investigation, police have an empty Walkman box, a semen sample, and 2 strands of blonde hair.
I found out at that time about a man who lived just a couple of blocks away, who had long blonde hair, who had recently been paroled for attempting to murder a woman.
Detective Como orders that the suspect be put under 24-hour surveillance. When the suspect discards a cigarette, police send it to the lab for DNA testing. The case then takes a turn.
Benita's boyfriend had just returned a motor vehicle that he had purchased to the previous owner, stating he did not want the motor vehicle anymore. This previous owner, on checking the motor vehicle, observed what he thought was blood in the trunk of the car, thought this was very odd, and reported it to the police.
Detective McCullough immediately impounds the vehicle so that forensic tests can be done on it. McCullough and Como return to the high-rise to have a word with their latest suspect.
You know, I asked him to provide a consent sample of his DNA for this case.
Benita's boyfriend can't believe police suspect him of murder, but he agrees to give them the sample. Police receive the test results the following week. Benita's boyfriend is not a match. The ex-convict with the long blonde hair is not a match. And the stains found in the trunk of the car are not even blood stains.
Our leads were starting to dry up. They were coming back negative. It was becoming very frustrating.
I was certainly disappointed in that regard, but knew that we had to just keep going.
1 week into the investigation, all police know is there's a killer at large who likes to keep trophies of his crimes. Police have no suspects in the Benita DeSagan murder case. But when a transit worker finds Benita's purse at the Pape subway station, his discovery gives police a new lead.
Initially, I had no idea where the killer had gone after the murder. But now I had a geographic location that was several miles away from the actual crime scene.
The investigation begins to pick up steam.
It was 2 weeks into the investigation, and we got a phone call from Benita's employers.
Benita's final phone bill has just arrived. It shows her calling card is still being used.
There was up to 44 telephone calls made after she was dead. These telephone calls could have been made by our killer.
I was able to see, where those telephone calls were being made to and where they were being made from. And one of the first things that struck me from the list was that these telephone calls were being made all over the province of Ontario.
The last 10 calls on the phone bill all came from the same number. When police connect that number to a Markham, Ontario address, they come up with their strongest lead to date.
There was a young male in his 20s who lived at that address, who'd been convicted of sexual assault before. This person had sexually assaulted his Asian ex-girlfriend by dragging her into a stairwell at knife point and then forcing himself on her.
The assailant's name is Roman Jans. Police follow him for the next 3 days. When he finally discards an empty bottle, an undercover officer collects it. Police hope the DNA sample they get from the bottle will prove Roman Jans is the killer. A few days later, the test results come in.
I received a telephone call from the biology examiner to tell me that this sample did not match, and I couldn't believe it.
We were very disappointed, and we had to figure out where our investigation was going to go at this point.
You try one thing, if it doesn't work, you have to try something else. And I still had the fact that her killer had used this calling card after the murder. I decided to send teams of investigators to all of the call recipients at the same time, and I was going to get to the bottom of who was using this calling card. With the interview of the person who received the very first phone call, they struck pay dirt.
Como learns the caller was a teenage girl named Kathy. Once he and McCullough hear Kathy made her call from a youth hostel not far from where Bonita's purse was found, they're anxious to talk to her.
We interviewed this young lady who told us that she received this calling card number from a friend of hers.
She was laughing because she said that her friend had fallen asleep at the table, and so all of the young people staying at the hostel had then taken that calling card number themselves, and they were all using it to phone all over the province.
Police ask Kathy for her friend's name. She tells them it's Michael Wall. She says the two of them aren't close. The detectives advise her not to tell Wall about their visit.
At this point, Michael Wall became the biggest priority in the investigation, because here was the person who was in actual possession of that calling card that belonged to the deceased the morning after the murder.
A surveillance team waits for Wall outside the hostel.
We're instructed to follow him, see where he goes, see what he does, try to get the DNA sample. And we just sort of hide in the crowds and hide in a car and just try to look not too suspicious.
When police do a background check on Michael Wall, they learn he is only 18 years old.
His mother had in fact disowned him, and his father had kicked him out of the house as well because of problems and difficulties he'd had with him. And this is why he ended up at this youth hostel.
Wall rides the public transit system for hours on end. He does not appear to go to school or to have a job. He spends most of his time alone. After 2 days of surveillance, Detective Woodhouse still has no DNA sample.
He was on foot after he got off the transit system, and he walked into a park area. He walks down an embankment near a river. I'm quite a ways off, but I want to get a little closer, so I bring up my camera, start taking pictures. And I zoom in on what he's doing, and he's actually masturbating. And I can't believe it.
Once Wall leaves the area, Woodhouse moves in.
I locate a condom with a discharge inside, and I called Al Como, and I said, Al, you're not gonna believe this. I got you a sample. And he goes, oh, that's good. I said, yeah, Al, but it's a semen sample. And he said, pardon?
Woodhouse discovers something else as well. From where Wall was standing, he could see the high-rise where Benita DeSagan was raped and murdered.
I just couldn't believe it when I heard it. This is one of the characteristics of a lust murderer, that they'll return to the scene of the crime to be able to relive their fantasies of what they've done to the victim. I believed in my mind that finally I was going to be onto the right guy.
Wall's behavior in the park has given detectives cause for alarm.
We decided to put a double team onto him and continue around the clock.
Lust murderers often become serial killers.
I was extremely worried that he was gearing up to do another attack.
Police suspect they know who raped and murdered Filipino nanny Benita DeSagan. But they're still waiting for the test results they need to prove Michael Wall is the killer. The day after their shocking discovery in the park, police follow Wall back to the very same place.
We're pretty sure this man is the suspect we're looking for. You don't want to lose this gentleman. You don't want to spook him. You just want everything to go well, want everything to go smooth. So there's a lot more pressure. He's carrying a yellow bag, and it appears really heavy.
Woodhouse spots a woman on a path nearby.
I alerted the crew to tighten it up. If he starts following this woman, we want to make sure nothing happens.
Wall begins to follow the woman.
He's getting closer and closer. I don't care about surveillance at this time. We're going to have to stop this man.
Woodhouse gives the order to take Wall down. But his order comes too late.
All I could see is his arm coming up. And he just struck this woman. My mind is, oh my God, he's just killed somebody else.
As soon as he sees the police, Wall flees the scene.
I'm very upset with myself, thinking I didn't contain it properly. I'm concerned with the woman, but this man is not going to get away.
The surveillance team loses sight of Wall, but Woodhouse grew up in these parts. He directs his men to a clearing by Warden Avenue.
And as it turned out, he did run into the area. I thought he would come out.
Police recover the bag Wall discarded. It's full of bricks. The woman is taken to hospital, and in time, she recovers. Wall is brought to police headquarters and asked to empty his pockets. One item draws McCullough's attention.
Mr. Wall actually had a missing calling card in his possession.
But that's not the most incriminating piece of evidence. Police inform Wall his DNA is a match to the killer's DNA found in the first 72 hours of the investigation. Michael Wall is charged with the rape and murder of Benita DeSagan.
I asked him whether he wished to provide a statement, and the only thing he said was, "I didn't kill anybody."
But the detectives have reason to believe otherwise. They're confident that on the night of the murder, Michael Wall was looking for a victim. Benita DeSagan had spent the day at home with the family she had grown close to. She had the night off. Once she made sure family members had what they needed, she went out to spend time with her boyfriend. But she ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Michael Wall saw an opportunity late at night when Benita DeSagan got off a transit bus and started walking northbound. It's what we refer to as a blitz attack. where, without warning, he overpowers his victim.
Wall dragged Benita into a stairwell and kept pounding her with a bag full of bricks.
He dragged her down several landings where he undressed her. And while she was dying from these massive head wounds, he sexually assaulted her.
When police search Wall's room at the hostel, they come back with Benita's Walkman and a chilling revelation.
His roommate was able to tell us on the night of the murder, when Michael Wall returned to the hostel, he said to the roommate with a big grin and a smile on his face, "I got it. I got it tonight."
What Wall got that night was the fulfillment of a lust murderer's sick fantasy. But it came at a terrible price. Halfway through his trial, Wall pled guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 25 years. The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case. In the world of fashion, a beautiful young woman has it all. She's loved and admired by everyone she meets. And prized by those watching from afar. The end result is nothing beautiful at all. In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Canada Day, a time for celebration. But not for two young Toronto detectives.
Although this was 25 years ago, in some respects it seems like just yesterday.
The victim is Cheryl Gardner, a 20-year-old model who recently moved to the city.
She was lying on the floor. She was partially clothed. Her head area had been covered with a blood-soaked sheet and blanket. I was emotionally traumatized by the amount of head injury. A lot of blood, a great deal of horrific head trauma. So much so that we both thought initially this could have been a shotgun wound. We're wondering if this woman had committed suicide, or we checked under the bed just to make sure there wasn't a shotgun or something like that.
No gun is found. This is not a suicide.
What initiated the response by emergency services was a phone call from a person who said that he was the superintendent. When we talked to the superintendent, he said he made no such call.
If the super didn't make the call to police, who did? While forensic investigators searched the apartment, Detective Boothby orders a canvass of the building's adjacent floors.
I felt very strongly that somewhere somebody had seen something.
The detectives continue their search for clues.
We noticed that her purse had been opened, her wallet was on the floor. This is all indicative of robbery or theft.
But the door shows no sign of forced entry. Did Cheryl know her killer and let him in?
We had to do what we call victimology. Who is the victim? What is her lifestyle? Who could have done this? Who are her associates? We found out that she had a few close friends, a very normal, ambitious young woman who had come to a big city to try to make her mark in life.
But they don't learn much else. Police contact Cheryl Gardner's family in Ottawa.
I was only 15 at the time. I remember being awakened by this incredibly, a scream I'd never heard before in my life, and I knew something was really wrong. I knew that something had changed forever because I had never heard my mom make such a scream. Cheryl was the type of person who I think could have almost done anything. In school, she was very, very good in math and sciences, but she always had this passion for fashion. She was very committed to her career. In fact, the weekend that she was murdered, she was supposed to come home. And she stayed in Toronto because she had this assignment. When the police first informed my family about what had happened, they didn't have a lot of information. They did know, though, that whoever did it without any forced entry, which made them think that it was someone she knew.
We knew that she had a boyfriend and that there was some disharmony between the two of them.
The detectives interview Cheryl's boyfriend at length.
Both in terms of being at another place at that time, and also his character, his nature. It just didn't make any sense to us. This young man was very much traumatized about what had happened to his girlfriend. We were absolutely convinced that he had nothing to do with it.
Detectives go back to the one concrete piece of evidence they have, the taped call to police reporting the crime. They suspect it's the voice of the killer.
The call was made by a person who was very matter-of-fact, unexcitable, monotone. The exact words were, "Radio room, please. I'm the superintendent at 33 Isabella Street. There's a dead body in apartment 1611. I'm gonna hang up now. I'm gonna be sick." Because he said, "I'm gonna be sick," G-O-N-N-A. We didn't feel he was particularly well educated.
36 hours into the investigation, Boothby and Oldham still have not slept.
Although you're very mentally and physically tired, you keep thinking, what are the next steps? Have we missed anything?
They return to Cheryl's apartment in search of new leads.
We took a moment just to stand at the scene and let it speak to us, because that's what scenes of crime do. They cry out to be interpreted. The Bell telephone jack had been removed from the wall, and the telephone had been disconnected from the jack. We saw that in her journal, she had an entry in there, Bell Repair 611.
The detectives re-interview residents of the building.
We found that a person purporting to be a Bell telephone employee had been in the building and had made communications not only with Cheryl, but with another young woman. We contacted Bell Telephone and determined from then that they had made no such contact with anyone in the building and that they did not have a service person there.
Then it started to make some sense. Maybe somebody gained entry by posing as a telephone repairman.
After 72 hours, we had the voice of the killer. We had information about his character, his sinister behavior of taking on the identity of a Bell Telephone repairman.
The detectives are getting a clearer picture of how the killer operates, but they have no idea who he is or what he plans to do next. Police believe someone posing as a telephone repairman brutally murdered model Cheryl Gardner.
We had to have a closed casket. And I still remember looking at the casket and thinking, this is all a mistake. There's no way she's in there. Please, somebody wake me out of this bad dream. We still didn't know what had happened. The police were working really hard.
The autopsy report comes in. There are no signs of sexual assault, but the murder weapon is identified.
The pathologist determined without doubt that the instrument was a hammer. The difficult features were the overkill. Why so much trauma? What type of person is this guy? Why did he commit defense the way he did?
The detectives speculate on one possible explanation.
We discussed this and thought that we were probably dealing with a psychopath.
If true, it would explain why the killer phoned in his own crime. Psychopaths crave attention. The detectives believe their man has probably been in trouble with police before.
Forensic psychologists tell us over and over again that criminals do not start out by killing. They start out by lying, cheating, stealing, breaking into houses, setting fires.
Police decide to play his call for every officer on the force.
We thought we'll play that over and over again on the radio system.
A fellow officer, Detective Boyd, tells Boothby he recognizes the voice on the tape. He just can't put a name to it. Oldham and Boothby try a new approach. They revisit Cheryl's apartment, this time with her best friend Tanya.
The best thing to do, we found, was to bring someone to the scene, traumatic as it is to them emotionally, and tell us what has been changed.
Although the murder was horrific, the scene was relatively organized. Psychopaths often keep a scene quite organized. She walked around the room. All of a sudden, she said words to the effect that, "Oh my God," she says, "the tape recorder is gone. The tape machine's gone."
Predators often take tokens, they take trophies, because they have very, very active fantasy lives. And the token and the trophy will let them relive the fantasy of the killing.
Police get another tip from a resident of Cheryl's building. He reports having seen a stranger wandering the halls delivering flyers just prior to the murder.
The witness related that he thought he had recognized him from the animal shelter.
At the shelter, a veterinarian tells police he recently fired a man who matches the description. His name is Ralph Power.
The animal shelter had contacted the police about Ralph Power's behavior when he worked there.
There was some suggestion that while he was there at the animal shelter that he had tortured cats.
But the veterinarian has no idea where Power is now. Police look up Ralph Power's record and learn he'd been jailed for attempted murder and was now on parole.
Power had just got out of jail for pouring gasoline into a mail chute of a woman's apartment and setting it on fire. She was seriously injured, burned badly. He got 10 years for that offense. Quite often, psychopaths torture animals, set fires. These are some of the classic traits.
Detective Boyd, who had earlier recognized the voice on the tape, confirms that it belongs to Ralph Power.
He said, that voice, that is him.
The detective had spoken to Power following complaints from the animal shelter. Boothby and Oldham need to find Ralph Power. But before they can, they receive a call about an attack at 240 Wellesley Street, a few blocks from Cheryl Gardner's apartment. The victim is Jessie Boudreau. She, too, is a model.
She had let the person into her apartment on the pretext that he was a Bell telephone repairman. As soon as he entered the apartment, he went to where the phone service was and then suddenly attacked her with a hammer. And he was going to kill her. And she was able to get the hammer away from him and hit him with the hammer. The apartment door was open just a little bit. She lunged for the latch, opened the door, and escaped from him. We took a photo lineup, 10 or 12 pictures, and I'll never forget her reaction. She just went hysterical and said, that's him, that's him, that's him, I'm positive that's him. We're dealing with a suspect that attacked 2 women within the period of a week. We still haven't arrested him. There's a perception that he will strike again. We got to get this guy quick, or the city's going to go into shutdown.
But where could he be? Police now know Cheryl Gardner's killer has attacked another woman. Their suspect is Ralph Power. He's out on parole, having served time for attempted murder. The detectives are shocked when they learn Ralph Power's address.
We found out from records at the parole office that he was living at 240 Wellesley.
The same building where the second attack has just occurred.
When we went to arrest Ralph Power and execute the warrant to search, we couldn't get any reply at his apartment. Both of us had worked in drug squads and found a much safer way to get into an apartment rather than kick a door in. Just simply make a phone call and say, hey, the cops are coming, you better get out.
The ploy works.
Now, initially, he was extremely defiant. He was going to sue us. We had the wrong person. He objected to being arrested. But Cheryl Gardner's tape recorder was in his apartment, along with other paraphernalia that was very similar to the disguise he was using as the Bell telephone repairman.
When I found out that he was arrested, there was a huge sense of relief, but there was also so many questions. Who is this person, and why did you do this to my sister?
He said to us, using his words, no bullshit. What do you guys got? We told him that he had been identified, that Cheryl's tape recorder was found in his apartment. He thought for a little while, and then he said, get me a coffee. I'll tell you all about it. This guy still wants to grandstand. He's still looking for gratification for what he's done. Let's put a tape recorder out and let him go. He's going to tell us quite a story. And he did. And he gave a 45-minute full confession in amazing detail, just amazing detail. He told us about spending literally hours and hours looking with his telescope and looking for what he called his potential candidates.
Power was looking for beautiful young women he wanted to sexually assault.
He was going to target what he said would be 10 women in downtown Toronto.
Once he had Cheryl in his sights, he found out as much about her as possible.
He was very clever at fooling people. He is not the type of person, if you met him on an elevator, that you would expect would be a killer.
He talks about two other men in there, and she sneezed quite loudly and said, I hope I'm not allergic to one of you. When she got off, Power said to one of the other guys, she can be allergic with me anytime.
He went to the floor above her apartment.
Power races to the staircase, then down to the floor below.
And he would put advertisement flyers indoors, so when he went to the floor to determine where his potential victim had gone, he could determine the one missing is in all probability where his intended victim was living. Look through the mail chute to determine whether or not it would be risky or not risky to attack her at that time.
He called Bell Information, got Cheryl Gardner's name, her phone number, and that's when he called her and said it was Bell Repair.
Power booked an appointment to work on Cheryl's line. He made himself a fake ID badge. He printed up a fake work order and presented it to her when he arrived for his appointment.
And then his plan was to, as he said, not to kill anybody, but to stun them with his hammer, just sort of hit them on the head and stun them while he did his sexual thing.
But things didn't go as Power had planned. After striking Cheryl in the head, she began having a seizure.
He said to us, I didn't want to see her suffering like that. That wasn't fair. Then he added, she might recover and be able to recognize me. And so he said he then struck her again and made sure that she was dead.
Power says he called police, posing as the building's superintendent.
I'm gonna hang up now. I'm gonna be sick.
Then waited to watch them arrive.
And he said in his confession, the chase was better than the kill. And I kind of got the feeling that this was part of the excitement of this rampage. When I looked into Ralph Power's eyes, I saw a person without conscience or empathy. His eyes, they just looked like two black holes.
In 1983, Ralph Power is sentenced to life with no chance of parole for 25 years. But it's not enough for Cheryl's sister, Carolyn.
You can't change what happened in the past, but you can definitely influence the future.
In 2006, Carolyn Gardner succeeds in pushing Parliament to pass a law requiring dangerous criminals like Karla Homolka and Ralph Power to have their DNA on file forever. Ralph Power's next parole hearing will be in July 2008.
My family and I will be there to make sure that Ralph Power stays behind bars for the rest of his life.
As long as I'm alive, if there's any way that I can prevent this animal from getting out, I'll do it.
The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case. The time comes when a father must say goodbye. His daughter wants to experience the freedom of the open road. For months, she calls home every week. Then suddenly, her calls stop. It's her father's worst fear, one that sends him on the hardest journey of his life. In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. In a northern Ontario town, detectives meet with a man named David Lopez. He has come all the way from Oregon to search for his 21-year-old daughter Melody and her boyfriend Sean Barrett. David Lopez has reason to believe the two of them were staying at a cabin near Sault Ste. Marie just before they disappeared.
In his heart of hearts, he was 100% certain that something bad had happened. David was very determined. He struck me as the type of individual that would not let something go.
David says Melody left home several months ago to backpack across North America.
He really didn't have a problem with Melody and her travels. He didn't seem to fear anything out there like a lot of parents would when their kids are out there traveling around.
David assumed his daughter was safe. She was traveling with her boyfriend. She called home every week.
They had a schedule where she would call and say, well, here's where we are today, here's our plan for tomorrow.
Police wonder if Melody simply got distracted and forgot to call. David insists his daughter wouldn't do something like that. The last time they spoke, she and Sean had some good news.
They had decided that it was time to take the trip home to Oregon, and they had discovered that Melody was pregnant. And it was ultimately the decision that it was time to settle down and raise a family. David was very excited to become a grandfather.
But Melody and Sean never came home. There were no more calls either.
As a parent, I'm sure he's sitting there waiting for the phone to ring at the usual hour when Melody would call. No contact, no phone calls, no messages left for him, either at work or at home.
6 weeks went by before David got any news. A young man named Chris came by the house looking for Melody and Sean. He had been traveling with them and was surprised to hear they hadn't come home. David wanted to know where Chris last saw Melody and Sean.
Chris advised David that they were picked up on the highway north of Toronto by an individual named Robert Armstrong. He offered them a ride to Sault Ste. Marie, so they figured that it would be best to take the ride through to Sault Ste. Marie, where they would have a better opportunity to pick the train heading westbound.
On the way up to Sault Ste. Marie, Robert Armstrong invited the three travelers to spend the night at his cabin. It was his little brother Richard's birthday.
When they arrived the first evening, Robert, Richard, Melody, Sean, and Chris began partying and celebrating Richard's birthday. All friendly, very easygoing, very relaxed.
Chris tells David the party soon got out of control.
Not long into the partying, Robert brought out a handgun, a .45 caliber Colt, and they began shooting the gun.
Chris says Robert Armstrong's behavior worried him, but he let it go. The police have heard enough. They know what the Armstrongs are capable of.
The Armstrong family had a very violent history and were very well known by the police as living outside the bounds of the law.
The police need to find out what's going on at the Armstrong cabin. They ask David to return to his motel.
David was headstrong. He wanted to go to the cabin as well. He felt maybe Robert Armstrong had been holding her hostage. But due to the history of the Armstrong family, David attending at the cabin was not allowed.
When police arrive at the cabin, they find Richard Armstrong home alone. They ask for his brother's whereabouts. Richard says Robert left weeks ago to work in southern Ontario. Police then ask about Melody and her traveling companions.
Richard denied having any knowledge of the girl, denied having any knowledge of Sean or any knowledge of Chris. None of them had ever been there. There was no evidence from Richard that there had been any involvement with the Armstrongs and Melody or Sean.
The police have no way of corroborating what David Lopez has told them. They go to David's motel to deliver the news.
David was advised that there was no information and no evidence to support the fact that they had been there or that they were there now.
All the police can do is promise to call David if they hear any news about his daughter.
David was very upset with that, feeling as though he had been let down by the police community.
David Lopez refuses to give up his search. He's convinced the Armstrongs are involved in Melody's disappearance.
It was completely consuming his life. Everything that he was doing on a day-to-day basis was based on the search for his daughter.
David goes to a nearby U.S. border crossing. He posts Melody's picture there in the hope someone will remember seeing her. The customs officer doesn't recognize Melody, but he is able to identify Sean. David Lopez now has information that may help the police locate his daughter. Sault Ste. Marie detectives have no new leads in the disappearance of Melody Lopez and her boyfriend Sean Barrett. But when Melody's father David returns to the station, he's eager to tell them what he has just learned.
When David attended at the border with the missing persons poster, he was telling his story to anyone that would listen. As fate would have it, the customs officer had dealt with the Armstrongs, Sean Barrett, and Chris.
The customs officer says he stopped them 6 weeks ago when they tried to re-enter Canada after buying alcohol in the U.S.
What had happened was when they got into the American side, picked up their booze, and attempted to come back into Canada, Chris was denied entry because of a minor trespassing charge that he had on his record. So he was deported back into the States. The information that David received at the border was the first concrete link, the first evidentiary piece of information that he had to link the Armstrong family to his daughter, Sean and Chris.
Police now believe Richard Armstrong has not told them the whole story. 72 hours into the investigation, they pay him another visit.
Parked a cruiser and walked into the cabin and knocked on the door to find Richard still there alone. Richard appeared to be nervous. He appeared to be frozen, just numb. Immediately upon us entering, he said, "Oh, by the way, I meant to tell you, I do remember Melody being here." And Richard started with this tale of how they had been there partying. They had consumed a large quantity of alcohol at that point. Richard detailed how his brother had done some slimy things Robert had made some sexual advances toward Melody, and that being pregnant, Sean took offense to that. During the course of that altercation, the handgun came out.
Richard tells police Melody stopped the fight before it got out of control. She said it was time for them to go.
Richard advised that Robert had given them a ride out to the highway and sent them on their way. They were on their way westbound as so their initial plans. Richard's demeanor led me to believe that there was more to the story than what he was telling us. I asked him point blank, "What would you say if I said that I think you killed him?" His chin started to quiver, and his lower lip, I could see his lip kind of swelling, and his eyes started welling up, and the next thing you know, he started yelling, okay, my brother killed them. He killed them and burnt their bodies in a fire.
Richard was living with such a guilty conscience. He just could not live keeping those secrets inside.
The detectives put Richard Armstrong in protective custody. They're worried what may happen to him once Robert finds out he has been talking to police.
Family members can turn on family members. It's happened many times in the past.
The police find Robert Armstrong in Windsor, Ontario. They place him under 24-hour surveillance, but they need evidence before they can make an arrest. The detectives then update David Lopez on the investigation.
We met with David Lopez and advised him that the case had been escalated from a missing person case to a homicide.
But no bodies have been found. David refuses to believe the young couple is dead.
I think David Lopez always had the strong hope that Melody and Sean were alive. I think he may have been thinking, as a lot of parents do, the kids are out somewhere. He never lost hope.
The following day, police secure the Armstrong property. They focus their attention on the fire pit in front of the cabin.
My first task was to ascertain whether or not there were cremated human remains. The fire pit was quite full, so as a result of that, I knew that we would have to go through this scene inch by inch.
On the fifth day of their search, forensic officers find what they're looking for: 2 small human bones.
This raises the level of the investigation to a new height, because now we're talking about the death of an individual that has been verified.
But to make a case for murder, police must now prove the bones belong to Melody or Sean.
All materials were brought back to my laboratory. You, of course, do want to get DNA samples, but DNA samples from forensic cremations is very dicey indeed. When you actually burn bone, you are drying it out. You are leaching things out of it, and they are combusting. And of course, DNA contained within those cells are being consumed by the fire.
The results lead nowhere.
There was no recoverable, analyzable DNA of any sort in the samples.
The investigation has reached a dead end. If police cannot prove Melody and Sean were murdered, their killer may go free. Police believe Robert Armstrong killed Melody Lopez and Sean Barrett, then burned their bodies. But they need proof before they can make an arrest. They turn to Robert's younger brother, Richard, for help.
Richard Armstrong was, in my estimation, living with a very shaky conscience. He was very uneasy, living with images in his mind of what he saw.
We asked him if he would accompany us back to the residence in order to show us through the scene where various pieces of evidence may be located.
As soon as Richard arrives at the family property, he leads police to the garage.
We found out that Richard actually had taken the gun and hidden it in one of the old vehicles that was located on the property.
Richard also explains why police have had such difficulty recovering the remains.
Once the fire had died down, Robert and Richard cleaned the fire pit out. Robert was quite concerned with the fact that there was large enough bones that could still be visible. The shovel was used to crush the bones that were still visible within the fire pit. After the bones were crushed, they were placed away from the cabin. These sites were all eventually shown to us by Richard when we did our walkthrough.
It's clear Richard was more involved in the murders than he at first let on.
Forensic team located not only human remains, but they located a large number of exhibits, buckles off of belts, buttons off of blue jeans, pack sack buckles, and so on and so forth.
They also find a bracelet.
This was the largest piece of jewelry or metal item that we actually found throughout the entire scene. This was very significant. As far as a personal item that had potential of being linked to a victim.
Police now have the proof they need to arrest Robert Armstrong.
A high-risk takedown was conducted. The officers had their weapons drawn. When an arrest of that fashion takes place, it's an overwhelming show of force on the part of the officers that are present.
Police also arrest Richard Armstrong as an accessory to murder. The story he told police in the first 72 hours of the investigation proved to be an accurate account of the night Melody and Sean were killed. After Melody broke up the fight between Robert and Sean, she decided it was time for bed. Richard escorted her up to the cabin.
Once they got back to the cabin, the information that we were able to gather was that another fight ensued.
There were words exchanged between Robert Armstrong and Sean Barrett with respect to his girlfriend, Melody. That escalated into more than just a verbal argument.
Melody was asleep. Richard was not.
We will never know what led to the first shot. After Sean was killed, Robert took Sean's body and placed it on the bonfire that was going. As a result of his actions, he was forced to eliminate the only link that was remaining, which was Melody.
Robert woke Melody up and told her Sean wanted to speak to her.
She came outside. It was now completely dark. Robert directed Melody towards the campfire.
When she looked down, she saw Sean's body burning in the flames.
Robert drew his revolver.
Melody begged for her life and the life of her unborn child.
Robert effectively executed Melody and shot her in the head. After shooting her, he placed her body on the fire.
Robert then made his younger brother an accessory to murder.
The Armstrongs not only cremated the bodies, they destroyed any evidence that Melody, Sean, or Chris had ever been there.
But one piece of evidence refused to burn. When the detectives present the bracelet to David Lopez, he knows it can only mean one thing.
David kept going from the day that he learned his daughter hadn't shown up in Oregon. till the day he was told that his daughter had been murdered. It had an inscription embossed right into the bracelet, and we discovered that the inscription was in relation to the god of travel, the protector of travelers. And Melody wore the bracelet everywhere she went. He had lost his daughter and his future son-in-law and his future grandchild.
Robert Armstrong was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Unable to cope with his guilt, Richard Armstrong tried to hang himself. He suffered brain damage and was declared unfit to stand trial.
Homicide happens, and in this case, for no reason at all. Just a senseless act supported by alcohol, craziness. It's just a total tragedy all around.
As a father, it's made me want to hold on to my kids a lot tighter. Sure makes me realize how fragile life is, and you got to hold on to what you have every day.
The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case. In the suburbs, working for a living means after work, you start living. It's family time. A time to savor the peace and quiet you've worked so hard for. But when morning comes, and the workday's begun, that quiet can take on an eerie tone.
Dorothy! Dorothy!
In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Police respond to a 911 call in a Scarborough neighborhood. It appears Dorothy Ortez has died in her sleep. There's just one thing.
There was a small amount of blood, and no explanation for why there should be blood.
Following procedure, the officer calls in homicide. Detectives Jim Jones and Tony War arrive at the scene.
There's no sign of a struggle. There's no sign of any great injury, except under her left eye, just in the lower eyelid, there was a bruise.
There was some speculation that she may have stumbled and hit her head on the corner of a dresser. Again, why did she die from that?
The detectives order an immediate autopsy. The pathologist tells the detectives that his initial examination of Dorothy Ortez showed no signs of an aneurysm nor any signs of a heart attack. But he has discovered one thing.
The pathologist came to us and said, "What are we going to do about the bullet in her head?" And we were totally shocked. We had no idea that Dorothy had been shot.
There certainly wasn't enough trauma, or not the trauma you would expect from somebody getting shot in the head.
It would be most unusual for someone to be shot in the head and for there to be no exit wound.
And even stranger, an almost imperceptible entry wound.
It turned out that the bruise that we saw beneath the eye was where the bullet had entered.
Someone held a gun up to Dorothy Ortez's face and pulled the trigger. At the Ortez house, the detectives interview the woman who made the 911 call. Her name is Juanita. She's been boarding with the family for a couple of years.
She was a foreign student. She was studying hairdressing, and she was home every night. But once a week, she would stay overnight at her boyfriend's. And it was the night that this happened, that she happened to be at her boyfriend's.
The detectives asked Juanita to tell them about Dorothy and the rest of the Ortez family.
Dorothy did seem to be a saintly lady that was involved in helping all kinds of people.
She'd been involved with the Girl Guides organization for a long time. And her husband, Richard, he had been involved with the Boy Scouts organization all of his life.
But Juanita admits they weren't the perfect family. There were problems caused mainly by their son, Donnie.
She did also tell us the son had some problems with the police, and that at one time had taken a sledgehammer to the house and had damaged the garage door and the veranda.
But Juanita says that wasn't the worst thing Donnie did.
One time he called the police on his brother-in-law, who ended up getting arrested for drugs.
Because of this, Donnie's sister lost custody of her 4-year-old son.
Children's Aid had placed the child in the custody of Richard and Dorothy to look after him.
Juanita says Dorothy never forgave Donnie for what he did to his sister. And that led to more conflict between them.
The boarder told us that the son had assaulted his mother on occasion, had slapped her.
His father, Richard, banished Donnie from the house. The detectives get an update from the lab. Police have determined that Dorothy was killed with a .32 caliber bullet, but they can't understand why the bullet is in such pristine condition. Most bullets, when fired, lose their shape. Dorothy's husband, Richard, arrives home and is told his wife is dead. The detectives want to know his whereabouts since last night.
He told us that he had done as usual, that he left the house, I think, about maybe 6:30 or after 6, that he had touched her, shook her, and that she said she was awake, and that he then left and went downtown to work.
He owned a window washing business, and he had 3 men that worked for him, and they met every morning around 7 o'clock.
The detectives estimate there was a 2-hour gap between when Richard went to work and Juanita arrived home. Plenty of time for murder.
I remember asking him if he knew how his wife had died, and he said he hadn't. So I told him that she had been shot.
Richard is shocked. He tells police he is a gun collector. He keeps them in his study.
He had 2 .22 caliber revolvers and a .38 caliber revolver. Now we knew that the caliber we were looking for was a .32, and he didn't own a .32.
We asked Richard who would want to kill Dorothy, who would want to shoot her, and he said, maybe our son.
Police need to find Donnie Ortez. After a bullet is found lodged in Dorothy Ortez's brain, her husband Richard says their son Donnie might have done it. The detectives learn that, like his father, Donnie owns a window washing company. But Donnie isn't at the job site. The detectives question his employee.
We learned that he was supposedly telling some of his employees that his dad had shot his mother in the head, the back of the head, and that the bullet had come out through the eye.
While that's not exactly what happened, it's suspiciously close. Meanwhile, uniformed officers canvass the neighborhood to see if anybody heard anything unusual. They're surprised by what they learn.
Nobody of the neighbors had heard any gunshot going off.
Detectives finally catch up to Donnie and bring him in for questioning. He denies killing his mother. He says his father is saying these things about him because they are now rivals in the window washing business.
He was not that friendly with his father or the rest of his family. But he was not happy that his mother was dead.
Donnie claims his crack about a shot through the eye was a wild guess. Besides, he's not the marksman in the family. His dad is. Ask anyone at the local gun club. Donnie has agreed to a lie detector test.
He passed it with flying colors.
His alibi as to his whereabouts, etc., were checked out, and he was cleared as a suspect. He was a bad actor, you know, but he didn't kill his mum.
At the Ortez house, forensic investigators are methodically searching room by room for clues. In Richard's home office, they find a letter addressed to Richard that has nothing to do with business.
The letter was dated about 10 days before Dorothy died.
The wording on it was basically, you know, you don't have the key to my heart, but you have the key to my house. I need it back.
Detectives bring in Richard Ortez for questioning.
I asked him if he was having any extramarital affair.
Richard admits he had a girlfriend, but says he hasn't seen her in 2 months.
Why is this being kept from us? You know, it could be just a person feeling guilty about having an affair. I don't know.
Detectives release Richard, but put him under surveillance. They dispatch officers to interview members of Richard's gun club.
They all recalled different weapons that Richard Ortez had owned, and a couple members also recalled that Richard Ortez had had a .32 caliber, what was referred to as a British Bulldog.
That's the same caliber of gun that killed Dorothy Ortez. But no .32 caliber was found in Richard's collection. Acting on a hunch, Appleton asks for the address of the club's bullet maker.
Members of gun clubs, they always have somebody who makes reloads for them because buying shells or buying the bullets are just too expensive.
The detectives pay a visit to Richard's girlfriend.
The girlfriend was a single mother with one child. Decent, hard-working lady. She was involved in scouting. And that's where she had met Richard.
The girlfriend tells police that she and Richard were having an affair for the last 2 years, but she wanted things to change.
She had given him an ultimatum that he left Dorothy or they were finished.
We expressed our suspicions to her that he may be responsible for his wife's death.
She's shocked, but not surprised.
She knew he was a member of a gun club, and that he had told her sometime in the past that he had had 3 special bullets made.
One of the bullets, he said, was for Dorothy. One was for the son. One was for anyone who tried to stop him and got in his way.
And asked her when was the last time she'd seen Richard, And she told us it was 2 or 3 days previous to that night.
Not the 2 months Richard has claimed. The girlfriend agrees to let police put a listening device in her apartment. Constable Appleton visits the gun club bullet maker.
Half his apartment seemed as though it was part of the gun trade. To me, it was like, wow, this fellow is not just making 1 or 2, he's into this big time. During the conversation, he told me that he had made some bullets for Richard Ortez.
Ortez wanted the bullets for an old .32 caliber British Bulldog, but the gun was nearly falling apart.
He was very vocal on how bad shape this gun was in.
Fearing the gun would blow up if Richard tried to fire it, the bullet maker agreed to make special bullets, no more than a quarter load of gunpowder per round. The bullet maker insists he had no idea Richard was going to use the gun on anyone.
I think he was trying to distance himself. If he admits that he knows he's making bullets for a man who wants to kill his wife, then he's going to be in deep doo-doo.
He offers police a few bullets left over from the batch he made for Richard. They'll be sent to the lab for analysis. 72 hours into the investigation, police have a prime suspect, but they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him.
We didn't have a murder weapon, and there was no eyewitness.
And so far, the bug in the girlfriend's apartment has given police nothing.
The listening device in the girlfriend's apartment had been placed in a false fireplace, and it turned out that the false fireplace was also a stereo system. And of course, when Richard Ortiz was over there, he had put on music, and all we could get was the music.
Does Richard suspect the place is bugged? Police need to fix the situation, but they don't want to alert the girlfriend. They're afraid she'll give away the game.
I believe that the girlfriend really had strong feelings for Richard. Hard to believe, perhaps, but I think she did. So, the day after we took her out to Swiss Chalet, while we were at Swiss Chalet, an officer went in, relocated the bug, and everything was just fine.
Or is it? The next night, Richard stops by. But things don't go according to plan. The girlfriend refuses to let him in.
And when she looked out and saw who it was, she got frightened, and she called the police.
In fact, she was very scared. She thought that something was going to happen to her.
Mounting evidence suggests former scout leader Richard Ortez shot his wife Dorothy in an almost undetectable way. Police have bugged his girlfriend's apartment, but their investigation is jeopardized when she refuses to let Richard in. She wants to help police, but she's frightened.
The girlfriend, I'm certain, was scared because she knew, for Richard had told her, that he had 3 special bullets made.
And one of them might be for her. The detectives try to convince her that the only way she'll be safe is if she helps them put Richard behind bars. Finally, she agrees. She invites Richard over the next night. He arrives bearing gifts.
He did actually take a lot of clothes over to her. His wife's things. He even took a pair of used oven mitts over there for her to use.
This time he has brought something special. His wife's fur coat. He tells his girlfriend that if it doesn't fit her, she should give it to one of her fat friends. He also jokes about his wife's lack of interest in sex.
He didn't miss her, and now he was free to do whatever he wanted to do. All the circumstances have to indicate guilt. That's the test for a circumstantial case. And that was what was happening as we were going through this. Each piece would drop into place, and that wouldn't fit any other conclusion.
Then one last piece of the puzzle falls into place. The lab confirms the reloads given to police by the bullet maker in the first 72 hours matched the bullet that killed Dorothy Ortiz. One month after Dorothy Ortiz was found dead, police finally have enough evidence to arrest her husband, Richard, and charge him with first-degree murder.
There was no denial. There was no screaming. There was no shouting that he was innocent. There was nothing of that. They just came along.
The detectives now believe they know the full story. Richard Ortiz fell in love with another woman and lost all interest in his wife of 28 years.
He wanted to walk away and have another life of his own. Didn't want Dorothy around.
So he devised what he thought was the perfect murder. As a gun lover, he was well aware that a bullet with a quarter charge doesn't make much noise. The neighbors would hear nothing. He also knew there'd be no exit wound. The bullet was too weak to penetrate the skull. When his girlfriend gave him an ultimatum, Richard decided it was time to act. All his careful planning would be worth it. He knew the boarder would be out all night. No one would ever suspect a thing. It would look like Dorothy died in her sleep.
So it was a very cold-blooded, deliberate act where a man can shoot his wife in the head, get dressed, go to work, and carry on like nothing ever happened.
When the bullet was discovered, Richard even tried to pin the murder on his son.
Richard had planned this very carefully, but not too cleverly.
At his trial, Richard broke his silence to speak in his own defense. He told the jury, a man has certain needs.
You could tell by the looks on the jury's face. If it would have been the old Roman times, the thumbs would have been going down at that time.
Richard Ortiz was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Dorothy.
If you see Girl Guide cookies for sale, you might think of Dorothy, because she was very much involved in Girl Guides. It often happens, something comes up and you talk about it, and I still think how shocking it all was.
The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case.